Welcome to Globe Watch with me, Charles Ebune. 147 students killed instantly in Kenya at Garissa University. That comes after, in Pakistan, more than 150 other students were killed by the Taliban. And this week marks 1 year after, ever since Boko Haram kidnapped plus 219 schoolgirls in Nigeria. That in itself, that terrorism increases day after day, proves to the entire world that the diplomatic, military, and political solutions to combating terrorism has limits. My guest today proposes or gives an insight on another area to combat terrorism, which is the global international legal framework. Barrister Felix Agbor Balla is a product of Cameroonian, Nigerian, European, and American universities. He worked in Sierra Leone for the United Nations Special Tribunal for the Sierra Leone before moving to Afghanistan as a United Nations Special Advisor or Legal Advisor on its Afghan mission. He heads the Center for Human Rights and Democracy in Boya, and of recent was elected as the president of Fako Lawyers Association. So, how best can we combat terrorism legally across the world? Barrister Felix Agbor Balla, thanks very much for accepting our invitation on Globe Watch, and welcome again.
Thank you. The pleasure is mine, sir.
As a former resident of Kabul, a city well known for terror attacks, you should be one of the finest advocates of draconian anti-terrorism legislation across the world.
Yeah, I first lived in Mazar in the north of Afghanistan, the birthplace of the famous Masood, who fought the Taliban and was killed by terrorists before I worked in Kabul. You know, it's a very interesting area of the law. The senseless killing, you know, the gross human rights violation, especially what happened in Kenya and what happened with the kidnapping of the girls, is something that calls for international condemnation. And I, for one, I strongly stand against the senseless killing and kidnapping and hijacking of innocent civilians in whatever shape or form. Meaning that I stand against terrorism and I criticize and I am fighting so that terrorists should be eradicated from this world.
From the United Nations perspective, where you have worked for so many years, do you think that the current international legal framework against terrorism are working, or they should be reinforced?
They are working, but you know, we cannot treat terrorism legally in isolation. You know, just like in your introduction, you said that there should be political, educational, social, cultural, and religious methods of trying to combat terrorism. Legally speaking, it would be a good thing, you know. If you look at what the UN has been doing, you know, there's a convention on the suppression on financing of terrorism, which tries, a 1999 convention, which in its Article 2.1b tries to give a definition of terrorism. But the problem is that even international scholars, lawyers, and the states, they have not agreed on a working definition of terrorism. That is why the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court doesn't have the crime of terrorism. But the International Tribunal that was created by the Special Court for Sierra Leone, you know, came up with something similar. There was the crime of terrorizing the civilian population. It's now a crime against humanity and a war crime. In the Special Tribunal for Lebanon holding in The Hague after the death of Hariri, they have...
The former Prime Minister.
Yes, they have adopted a definition similar to the 1999 definition of terrorism. But the problem, it's not just about the law. The problem is that when we talk about terrorism, we are looking at it from the individual perspective. But what of state-sponsored terrorism? What of things done by Hamas? You know, how do we figure out, how do we factor condemning the state-sponsored terrorists? And even the International Criminal Court, the ICC, the Rome Statute, it's only for moral persons, meaning that a state cannot be brought in front of the ICC. But fortunately, the International Court of Justice, which is one arm of the United Nations, which can hear matters that concern states, has the jurisdiction to try issues that might concern state terrorism.
Let's isolate the debate to some few countries and start with the United States of America. After the 9/11 attacks, the so-called U.S. Patriot Act or the Bush anti-terrorism law was so severe, and one argument of those opposing the bill was that it was a severe blow to civil liberties. Massive surveillance, electronic surveillance, telephone call surveillance, and what kind of surveillance you can imagine. Do you think we can have a binding legal document that can combat terrorism without human rights violation?
No, we have the 1999 convention, which is binding. The Patriot Act, just like the anti-terrorist law in Cameroon that came out in December 2014, it's very good, you know, to help to combat terrorism. The problem from somebody with a human rights background, you know, is that, as you say, it erodes the civil liberties. So we need to have a balance between protecting our states, protecting our individuals, protecting our combatants, and also respecting civil liberties, the right to privacy, the right not to just be arrested because somebody suspects you to be a potential terrorist. So that's the question that we have to balance. It's not very easy. There is this thorny issue, not only in national jurisdiction, in international jurisdiction, the whole issue about self-determination. When I was growing up, when I was reading documents, magazines, you know, they used to call some of these so-called terrorists freedom fighters. Some of them are liberation groups. So what if of a situation where the situation of apartheid in South Africa, during Mandela was brandished a terrorist, when you have foreign occupation or subjugation, not so, and a group of persons decide to take arms,
is using.
Yes, decides to take arms against the foreign occupation, will you brandish that organization, a terrorist organization? So that is a problem. But notwithstanding, we should be bold enough. We should be bold enough if we have democratic governments which have been voted by the people and who have the interests of the people, we should face this terrorist issue in its face and address, like the Patriot Act, like the anti-terrorism law in Cameroon, but while looking at maintaining, you know, let us not have excessive trigger-happy administrative officers who want to take the law to settle their own personal problems.
You just said that we need to strike a balance between combating terrorism legally and protecting fundamental human rights, such as the freedom of association, to privacy, and whatsoever. As we speak, there is a bill in the French National Assembly on intelligence gathering, and that is just a semblance of the BIA anti-terrorism law, if you like, the Boko Haram law, or if you like, the U.S. Patriot Act. I want us to be sincere. How do we strike the balance legally?
No, especially in its implementation. You see, Mr. Charles, I travel a lot, you know, like you and others, and I don't have a problem going all through security checks because they are protecting us. You know, the intelligence gathering, yes, it violates privacy, but as for the general interest of the state, it has to be protected. I am sure if you were a parent or a relative of the 200 girls adopted in Nigeria, you would call for whatever tough measures to fight terrorism, you know. So in drafting the laws, the draftsmen should include not only people from the government, they should bring in the civil society guys. They should bring in human rights advocates. They should bring in independent members. They should bring in lawyers, you know, who would look at it from a different perspective. Because if you only bring lawyers working with the government and politicians, they will draft a law to suit the time being. You know, if there's a terrorist attack today, whatever law they will draft will be very harsh. But realistically,
the problem here is that of contextual definition, and George Bush, Paul Biya, just like Tony Blair during the 2000 Terrorism Act and the 2001 Terrorism and Crime Security Act in the UK, we tell you that we are practicing what they simply call in legal sciences preemptive justice.
No. Preemptive justice or preemptive war, it's something which has just gotten into the legal or political lexicon in the last couple of years because of what happened after September 11 and because of the might of the US. They force it down the throne of others. I am okay with it. I subscribe to it. But the problem is that we should still have a balance. where do we draw the line between aggression and preemptive war? People can use that, to attack another state or an individual, So it is a good thing, but we have a definition. The 1999 convention talks about any act which is intended to cause bodily harm or death against a civilian population or any other person not taking part in active hostilities in a combat situation, with the aim of forcing a civilian population, a government, or an international organization to take a decision or not to take a particular decision, So it is all encompassing. The problem now is in the application. The problem now is in what is any act? How do you interpret any act? In a democratic setup where the government has the mandate of the people, they will interpret any act in a very liberal and legal manner.
Let's take, for example, how will you interpret any act in such a case legally?
Well, I would not.
Let's work.
I will give
public usable example.
I will give instances because there are times where the definition might not really cover it. I'll give instances. Any act, for example, if you, like what happened with the 200 girls, for example, if you come and bomb a church in Yaoundé, if you go and attack a mosque, if you go and kidnap 100 women, if you go to school, for example, if you hijack a plane, for political or religious aims, it will fall under any act. The categories of any act, just like what they say in law, the categories of negligence are never closed. The categories of any act are never closed. So it would depend on the circumstances that you analyze to say this falls within the ambit of the whole context of any act.
Okay, any act. Let me take you to Kenya. Prior to the Garissa University attacks, the Kenyan administration had passed a bill which was severe on terrorism, and the argument the government of President Uhuru Kenyatta presented was that, like George Bush, like others, they said this is preemptive justice. Yeah. Civil society organizations, you were talking a while ago, human rights group, they condemned the Uhuru Kenyatta administration as wanting to create a police state in Kenya. Yeah. They succeeded in having a good chunk of that legislation scrapped out. And about 2 or 3 months after is what we had in Kenya. And when Al-Shabaab entered the university, what they did is that they said all Muslim students this way, all Christian students this way. And all those who said they were Muslim, they began asking them questions. In the Quran, if you don't answer, you join the Christian students. And they decided to slaughter all the Christian students. How do you apply the law or define a law in such a situation where you have selective killing? Are you going to do selective justice?
No, you cannot do selective justice. Selective justice has been criticized a lot by the international community. And let's be honest, a legislation deters people from committing crimes, but does not stop. Whatever legislation you have, whatever law, there are outlaws, there are outcasts, there are people who will break the law. There are people who will violate the law. So the law itself, the legislation itself will not stop, might deter some people, but would not stop. In the case of Kenya and in other places in the world, we clearly know that the terrorists have a target. Most often than not, they have a target, For example, with the fundamentalist Muslims, their target is the Christians, but not only Christians, seculars, but also liberal and leftist Muslims who don't adhere to the fundamentalist preaching of their religious dogma. So, but in terms of administering justice, I say we of those who are against this senseless killing, we cannot play their game. We should also ensure that those who are arrested, they should be properly tried. It's hard to justify why somebody will kill
you are a barrister,
200 persons.
You are a barrister at law. Will you defend Abubakar Shekau in a court? Will you stand as a lawyer for, unfortunately he's dead, for Osama bin Laden? Will you stand as lawyer for Godan, the leader of Al-Shabaab.
Mr.
Frankly, can you defend a terrorist in a court of law?
Mr. Ibune, for fair hearing, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights says it all. The UN Charter, the Cameroon Constitution, they are entitled to have an attorney. Their story, the director says, even the dull and the ignorant have their own story. For a proper defense, you don't know whether his state of mind, whether he's mentally okay, you know, and he needs proper defense before he is condemned. So everybody have a right to an attorney.
Will you defend?
I would defend him. I would defend him from a legal, from a human rights, and from a humanitarian standpoint. I would defend him. I would not advise him. I would advise him to plead guilty for the crimes he committed if there is sufficient evidence that he committed those crimes. Because we need to be sure. It's a criminal matter. It's proved beyond reasonable doubt. Although in the International Tribunal, the standards are lower than what pertains in our national jurisdiction. But he has a right to attorney. That is why Charles Taylor, I worked in the court in Sierra Leone. Charles Taylor had lawyers. Karim Kam was the head of the Taylor defense team. Mohamed Kalon, Chief Taku, our own Cameroonian lawyer, lived in Boya. Don't get me wrong. Genocide.
The government will simply see people like you as enemies of the state.
No. It's not being an enemy of the state. They will see us as those who are ministers in the temple of justice. And that is the role of an advocate. You know, we and the judiciary, the bench and the bar, we work towards the cause of justice. And I think the government also owes a duty to its citizen to ensure that justice should not only be done, but should be seen to be done. So it's a catch-22 situation. But we have to be honest. Otherwise, we play the games of the terrorists. We go back to the uncivilized and barbaric age where it becomes an eye for an eye. When you are, it's like mob justice. Civilized society, we have moved from that stage. You know, we don't want to play in their hands because that's the argument they will use in their mosque, in their fundamentalist arena. That look, they have killed our people without proper process. We need proper process for us to be seen to be fair and equitable.
Very soon, I understand that there will be a UN resolution on how to tackle Boko Haram. It's still in the process. These are issues that concern us directly: Chad, Cameroon, Nigeria. The military solution seems not to be working, and it will never be 100% productive. To an extent, some analysts consider the military solution to terrorism as counterproductive, because in the course of that there are killings, and that is used as an argument by terrorists. What kind of legislation will you advise these countries to put in place? Cameroon already owns one. What kind of legislation may you be expecting from Chad? May you be expecting from the Central African Republic, from Nigeria and others?
Mr. Ibune, I will not agree with those who say the military solution is not. It's working. But as I said, we need a holistic approach of these things, you know. The military, the social, the cultural, the economic, and educational part of it. But when it comes to the legal aspect, I expect to see that these states affected by Boko Haram, they should create a legal mechanism where all of them will share intelligence. But also, why not we have a special court to try terrorist acts in the region? You know, we can have Cameroon, for example, as the host of the court. And also it could be extended to the entire Africa, you know, to show that the entire continent or the region, you know, we take the matter anti-terrorism very, very important. When you look at the solution only from the national frontier, terrorism now is a transboundary or a transborder crime. You know, like Boko Haram, they operate in Chad, Niger, Nigeria, Cameroon. Who knows, Equatorial Guinea might be involved and Gabon someday. So why do you limit solutions only to your state? I think the continent of Africa, you know, should create a special court to try terrorists. If not, let those countries affected, Cameroon, Nigeria, Niger, and Chad, they should come up with a court and try to see how they can try these terrorism. Because the crimes are wanton, they are gross. You know, they are crimes that are despicable, and they target innocent civilians. They target There's soft targets, women, children. You know, I am hoping that something it's done, especially with the coming to Buhari in power, that all the leaders in the region are affected should synergize more than what they are doing to ensure that, you know, they put an end to this Boko Haram.
You are proposing a regional court because we already have a regional military task force to tackle the issue of terrorism. Who would you like to see sit on that bench if you were to give a sketch?
Well,
what should be the composition?
Well, the composition will be judges, lawyers from all the countries.
Independent people?
Yeah, you will have a combination of judges who have achieved in their lives. You know, they have worked for more than 20 years, for example. Lawyers also should be involved, you know, and civil and common law, because some of the countries have common civil law, common law, and they come up with the statutes of the court, and then on how judges will be recruited or be appointed, how they appoint a prosecutor. They will have requirements and qualifications of the prosecutor, and how for the defense team to get involved in it. I think if they involve the civil society, I always like the civil society to be involved from the beginning, just like what the Rome Statute did and the court in Sierra Leone, to involve the civil state in the drafting of the statutes, you know, because we have things like victim and witness protection. That's something which is supposed to be also taken into consideration. The welfare of the family, if people have to travel to go to the courts, you know, visas and all those logistics arrangements. So I think if you look at it from an all-encompassing angle, we might have something that will go a long way, not only in deterring terrorism, but in bringing states together, in them working together for a common goal. Because one of the biggest problems that we'll be facing in this continent is terrorism. Whether it's Boko Haram or another terrorist organization, it's a big problem that the earlier, the sooner, because I think we reacted late. We started fighting Boko Haram very late. That is why they had made enormous gains. But you see that when states came together and they started retaliating, Boko Haram now has been confined to some small area in Nigeria. But it's still a work in progress, and it's a long way to go.
Let me blow your trumpet somehow. But I can't blow it better than you. You have just been elected the president of the Fako Lawyers Association. Would that be formulating an idea for a regional tribunal, or if you like, a continental tribunal, a special one for counter-terrorism? Will it start with the Fako Lawyers Association and reach up to the continental level at the AU headquarters in Addis Ababa? Is that part of your mandate?
Well, FACLA, we call it Fako Lawyers Association, is an association that caters for the welfare, the interests of lawyers in Fako division. But we also address national issues, and even at times international issues, you know. We are an association of close to 329 members. I think in the Bar Council, Fako Lawyers are one of the most organized group of lawyers in the association. And nothing stops the Fako Lawyers Association to look beyond the frontiers and borders of Fako and in the country. You know, if they were to create an international regional court, we have capable and able members of Fako Lawyers Association, both seniors. We have had a Bar Council president from Fako Lawyers Association, Barrister Emeritus Barrister Tabisong Jr. We've had a General Assembly president, Barrister Gilbert Abuno. We've had members of the Bar Council. Fako Lawyers Association, we've always had members of the Bar Council. We currently have Barrister Ntoko and Barrister Njwale. So it's a very, and late Barrister Bono, it's a very vibrant association. And as a vibrant association which lives in the 21st century in the global village, we are not limited to Fako division. We aspire, we have ambition. Even if it means that somebody from Fako Lawyers Association to head the International Criminal Court, to be the prosecutor of the ICC or a judge at the ICJ, I can assure you that of the 329 members, we have members of Timber and Caliber. We have Chief Taku. Chief Taku was the lead counsel in the International Court Criminal Tribunal in Sierra Leone and Rwanda. So those are the kind of people, one of the finest, the creme de la creme that we have in legal practice in this country from Fako division.
Barrister Felix Agbor Balla, I'm afraid with that optimism and with your legitimate ambitions, we have to end here. Thanks very much for accepting to be guest on Globe Watch.
Oh, pleasure is mine. I'm always welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Yeah.